Welcome to the Franchise Woman podcast, where passion and purpose collide, profits are made, and relationships forged. I'm Rebecca Monet, CEO and Chief Scientist at Zoracle Profiles, along with my co-host, community advocate, speaker, author, and entrepreneur, Tracy Kawa. Our special guest today is Emmanuelle Hardy. So Emmanuelle has been in the franchise industry for over 20 years, and she's held many roles over those years, including being a multi-unit franchise owner, and then also working on that franchisor side. Now, I'm not going to tell her whole story because she's going to tell us that story, but I find it fascinating that you've been on both sides as a franchisee as well as on the franchisor side. So I want to talk all about that. Welcome to the show. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So fun. These stories of both sides, Tracy, just always excite me because the perspective is so interesting. So sorry, I interrupted you.
No, and it's not just that. I agree with you, Rebecca. It's not just that. It's Emmanuelle's why behind it. Your why is so compelling. You know, it's all about getting back home. I really want our audience to hear it.
Sure. So, I found myself at a crossroads about 20 years ago when I really wanted to find a way to move back home, which home for me is France, the country of France. And I had been in the IT industry at the time, and then got laid off. And should we restart because I'm off to a wrong?
Oh, you sounded great. You sounded great.
So got into this industry and really wanted to find myself to go back home. So I came across Curves for Women. What that was really like a way for me to go back home. I was not an MBA. I was not in an executive track and in a corporation. It was hard to find a way through a big company to go back home. So my choices were either to go back home and find a job, or really look at an opportunity. And I came across Curves for Women, which was a new fitness concept at the time. And we really took it to France. And my why was really to go back home. So in a way, I knew it was going to work because that was my way of going back.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So you came to the US as a student, and then you stayed and went into the corporate environment, went into IT, which you think would be a stable, wonderful situation, right? But then there was a change at that company. You were let go. Common story why people end up in franchising, right? And that, but inside was always this longing to go back to France, what home for you. I can relate. I'm from Switzerland, and I have that longing every single day. Now you ended up going into business with your sister and your husband at the time. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
How was that? How was working with your family and growing the Curves business with your family?
For me, it was a great experience. You have to have the hard conversations. You have to, lay out all the potential. Usually it's around money, right? And I've seen many best friends blow up, or, partnership blow up. And actually there was a guy back in France, had a business in the franchising, and he said, I only partner with people I don't like, so I can part with them. And I'm like, well, I'd rather partner with someone I really know and I really like, so I can make sure we can be successful together. And so it was a great opportunity. Frankly, if I had to start another business, I would definitely pick my sisters again. We all did really well with it. It was just at a time where our lives were taking different directions, and we decided to focus on other things.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's great. to not only have a sister who you're close with, but to also be able to work harmoniously with that person. That's so beautiful.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So,
It didn't mean it was easy, right? It can be challenging, but when the love for one another is stronger than the business matter, then you can overcome anything,
yeah,
right? And there was no
Yeah.
way I was going to lose my sister over any business, anything, right? And I can't lose my sister, period.
right.
So, and it didn't mean it was easy because we had a lot of hard conversations. And we sometimes, slammed the doors and were mad at each other. And found each other back.
But that goes back to where Tracy started this conversation. It's really about the why, because it wasn't just about building a successful multi-unit business, which ultimately is what you did. It was about family and home. So every decision, I would think, was around that, about maintaining this beautiful relationship, even when it was hard. That was the foundation. We're building something as a family, that's different than, gee, I'm going to open up this business and take the money to the bank. There's a heart part
Yeah.
of that, making us responsible to one another, and much more driven to have it be successful. I would think. I'm putting words in your mouth, but I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. That's how I would look at it.
And that's a very good point. And when you go into any venture with a strong why or strong goal, nothing can fail you, right? Failure, when I did that, failure to me was not an option. It just didn't exist. Literally, it didn't exist. Um, and there are many things, that could have derailed us. When we first moved back to France, we went to see 7 banks. They look at the front page of the business plan. They saw fitness. They say, French women don't work out. We're not looking at it. 5 out of 7.
Wow.
We just sold everything, moved with our suitcases and 6-month-old baby. And here we are facing, no one wanted to finance us. And finally, the last 2 considered it. And we ended up getting one. And that one actually ended up financing almost all of the locations in France at the time. So having, being able to overcome the obstacle, that your why is going to allow you to do that, right? If you don't have a good reason, and that's when I talk to our candidates looking at franchise, and in the first conversation, it's like, okay, what if it doesn't work? What can I do? Well, why wouldn't it work? Right? What's going to lead you to fail if that's the case, and really get to understand their why, so that they can again build their no failure plan.
This is making me think that there are probably so many people out there that would just love to start a business, but they're thinking about family. How would this impact their family? What strain or stress would it put on their family? What kind of family support would they have? What would you say to all of the people who are thinking along those lines right now and maybe weighing out the pros and cons of going into business ownership?
It's first of all having a plan, right? You mentioned I was a financial advisor initially. That's what I did. I help people have a budget, and I still do with some of the candidates. I help them look at, okay, what do you need? What do you want? Right? Because we have those numbers are different. And what I'd remind people is that it doesn't matter which business you're going to go to. Starting a business will be a sacrifice. But we have a say here at Neighborly. We say, if you do what people won't do for just a short while, you'll be able to do what people can't do for the rest of your life.
Oh my God, I have the chills.
Me too.
The
But I
chills.
think people are willing to sacrifice, and that's why it's a family decision. That's why it's important to get everyone on board. And I've seen couples both quit their jobs to start businesses. I've seen people with 3 to 4 kids and deciding, okay, we're going to do it because ultimately that's better for us and for the children. So it's all about planning, right?
I wonder, I love this word sacrifice because it is something in the US that we're not so good at, right? We want it all. We want independence and wealth, but we don't want to sacrifice to get it. I'm not saying there aren't a lot of people that won't, but it's not a common value of American folks. But it really is an important factor for creating the future or the destiny that we want for ourselves, and of course for our family and the legacy that we want. It's a day-to-day conscious decision that we're doing this for a bigger reason, whatever that reason is: safety, security, independence, control, legacy, whatever it is, serve the community. There needs to be something. It's easier to sacrifice, back to your point, when we have a good reason to, right? I can sacrifice not eating that chocolate cake if I know that I'm going to look fabulous on my wedding day, as an example. And that's a really dumb example, but it's a picture that we can all appreciate. Oh my gosh, I love that word. I love that word. And it really is, to your point, Emmanuelle, a group decision, right? Husband, wife, family. It is the whole thing.
It is. And in this world of instant gratification, it's something we need to instill. I know I do it with my children. It's teaching them, okay, you want to buy the pair of Jordans, that's what's in these days, I guess. Well, maybe you don't want to go to that restaurant for lunch, right? You have to make the sacrifice of that to be able to get, and teaching them to save and plan.
Yeah, and businesses like that. It's interesting because there's a lot of research on just this point that you're bringing up. Those of us that are able to delay gratification, right, will always end up more successful than those that are into instant gratification, whether that's with our health, as you saw with curves, or with a neighborly in any business you're growing, or a marriage. If we're able to have that self-control, that self-discipline, most importantly, the ability to delay gratification, that's getting tougher in today's society. And I don't want to get off on that too much, but it's a beautiful attribute. So I'm so glad you brought it up. I gotta say, I'm curious. I'm really curious, Manuel. You were in a sexy business, right? Curves was beauty and health and fitness, and primarily women, in fact, all women, right? And then now you're with a home services, a blue collar organization, where you're working mostly with men. Is that right? And so my question is, how did you do that? And what did you have to do in your mind? And just tell me about that whole process.
Absolutely. And you're right. I went to a business that was about 80% women to a business that's probably about 90% men. So talk about a drastic change, right? I remember when I first started with Neighborly, my boss at the time told me, he's like, well, you better brush up on hunting and fishing and all the American games because you're going to talk about that. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I've never fish. I like water and I like to swim, but that's about it. So I remember finding myself sometimes on Sunday night Googling the football results. I will admit, I even Googled one time the Super Bowl results. To be
You
able
gotta do what you gotta do, right?
to have educated conversations, but we found some other commonalities. It was never a challenge, and it's a people relationship, right? When we talk about franchising, and we always find commonalities. So that's really my point. So it was not definitely not a challenge.
Crazy.
I'd like to hear a little bit more, Emmanuelle, about where and when you made this decision to be your own boss. Going back, right, when you first jumped off with the curves, and thinking about how you did persevere, right? Your sister, your kids in tow, door knocking across France, right? To find the right spot, the right location. Like, that must have been a really challenging time. I'd like to hear more about like what drove you during that time.
For sure. So, after I graduated, I got into the IT world, which anyone who knows me knows that's not my world.
Right.
And I actually ended up working for a spin-off of a big corporation, a startup. They were less than 2 years old when I started with them, and within a couple of months, they hired me to promote their business in France and in Quebec, just because of my language skills. That was a good fit. But within a couple of months, the company decided to fold, and they just shut everything down. So I go to the office one morning at 8 a.m., talk to my boss. He's like, well, we're done here. So just pack your stuff. You can go
That
home.
day,
That's
no,
it.
nothing. Just we're done.
No, we're done. We're shutting down everything. I mean, it was like a huge Fortune 500. So it was just peanuts.
So unexpected.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went home crying, and I swore that day that no one would ever tell me when to work and not to work. And that's when I went into financial services. I was working for another big name in the US, but I was building my own practice. It was going to be, my own, to manage, to grow, and to sell when I would retire. So, and during that time, that's when I came across curves, right? So, though it was hard, I ended up being top 10 advisors in my market. I made the decision to leave because, again, I was looking at going back home, and that was the vehicle that could take me and live in France again, and see how it would work for us. Mm-hmm. So that's really what led me to business ownership. We always talk, anyone who's owned their own business know the freedom that it provides. And even though today, I'm back in a corporate setting, if you will, working for the home office, I know that at any point in my life, if anything was to happen, I have the tools and the abilities to go back and start my own business.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now working with entrepreneurs yourself, you have wisdom and experience that you can share. I think some of that is stage of life, right? At some point it's we want to build, and then at the next point is we want to help others build, right? We want to share our experience, and you're getting to do that by helping folks get into the right business, so they can succeed and express their why. I love this story. I love how you weave in and out from corporate to business ownership, grow something really big, back to corporate, where you're really doing both. You're helping entrepreneurs, plus you're allowing yourself to grow your career in the corporate environment. When you look back, was there any kind of pivotal moment, something that happened in your family, other than this, boom, the business is done with IT? Are there any other pivotal moments where you made big decisions or changed your perspective that you could share with us?
Um, the big decision, the next big decision was to move back to France, obviously. That was a big one, and that was for the purpose of not only having a big challenge, but also being back with family.
Mhm.
You know, I found myself also, about 5-6 years ago when just before I started to work with the Neighborly brands, I had been in business for myself for 15 years, one way or another. And but after my divorce, my ex-husband kept the business that we had started in the U.S. It was another small franchise network. Um, and I really, I really wanted to find a place where I could align, a place I could align with, right? Really wanted to find something that was not sexy, not fancy, not trendy, that was really stable. I was looking for people that or a business, a franchise. I knew I wanted to stay in franchising because I love entrepreneurship. And as you were saying, I have a connection with every one of the candidates that I speak with because I've been there, right? And I've been in their shoes, and I can relate to their emotional ups and downs as they go through the process. But for me, it was important to find a good home, as I call it. And definitely Neighborly was that. And one thing that really attracted me to them was the values. Not only the business itself, the stability of the business, but the values it carries.
Of Neighborly. And it's interesting because the why is the same, right? It's still about home. Home is just a little different now, right? And the family has extended to your co-workers and fellow business owners. So you've just redefined or expanded this idea of home. I mean, even Neighborly, look at the logo, right, is about home and providing services to the homeowners. So it's interesting, this theme in your life, Emmanuelle, that is about home and stability and family and relationship. It runs through your decisions change and where you're located changes, but the common thread is still family. Now I'm getting chills, Tracy.
Wow.
Family and home, which allowed you to make these wise decisions, dramatic decisions, to move across the pond, so to speak, to move back across the pond. But each decision had that why behind it. So I applaud you in that. And I applaud you that you pull out of your candidates that are considering business ownership what their why is. Do you frequently find that the whys are completely different from candidate to candidate, what they want out of the business?
Absolutely. And that's what I love. It's like there's not one standard answer. There are as many answers as there are candidates. One thing I've always loved about franchising is, it doesn't matter what you've done before. What matters more is who you are. Because we're, as a franchise, if you partner with a strong franchisor, franchise system, you are going to be in good hands to be successful. Now, the person you are is what's going to make the difference. So, and I love that, because you have anything from truck drivers to teachers to nurses to former CEOs. I mean, you name it. There are all kinds of people in this franchising industry, and that's the fun. And they all have different whys.
Yeah. The reason why that's so important also is because sometimes for people who don't really know, who aren't so familiar with franchise, it just seems like, they might be thinking, oh, restaurants or oh, certain type of businesses, and you have to be this kind of person to follow that kind of process. And they don't realize what you just said, that people come into franchise from all walks of life. No matter what your previous role was, no matter if you worked in corporate, no matter if you worked in public service, maybe you're a veteran, no matter what it is, people come to franchise, and there's a fit for everyone, even under the neighborly brands, right? There's a fit. It just depends what that fit is. And maybe what someone may not fit with one brand under the neighborly umbrella, they might fit with another brand. And there's just so much to choose from.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Lots of options under the neighborly umbrella, but all with a similar set of values, which is what attracted you to them. I also want to point out this whole thing about stage of life, right? When you have a baby and a husband, and we're going to France and we're building, that's a different level of energy, a different level of what things are important. We got other players, and now our children are much older. The needs that they have are much different. Whether we're married, single, wherever, all those are stage of life things. And you adapted well to each of those situations. I'm not sure I would have been as good at it. I'm not quite that.
Yeah. You guys have a say in American English. It's when life gives you lemon, make lemonade, right? So I always try to look at the situation and try to remain as positive as possible. And while it was hard, anyone who has gone from being an entrepreneur to go back to a W-2 it's a hard transition, right? Because mentally and sometimes I get the questions from the candidates like, why are you working for someone now? You've been so successful. And to your point, it's about your stage in life. I was reading a book recently about the seasons of life.
Mm-hmm.
There really are seasons, right? And at the time where I found myself leaving the business I had owned due to the divorce, I was like, I wanted to start another business, but I didn't have the emotional energy. I didn't have the support at home anymore to do that. And I just didn't want to be alone, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I looked for, it took me a year to find the neighborly brands, because I was not going to settle for anything less than what I thought was what I wanted. And once I found this company, I just love, I in a way, I get to impact even more people because of what I do today than if I only had my own business.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So before we run out of time, Emmanuelle, tell our listeners, our audience, where they can get a hold of you.
Sure. So I can be found on LinkedIn, by the way. So always a good place to connect. But my phone number is 734-822-6549. And that's the best way to get a hold of me, either via text or voicemail, or by email at my first name last name at nbly.com.
That's awesome.
Perfect. So to kind of wrap this up, I have found this conversation fascinating. It's made me think of a few things, but the one thing that stands out for me, for you, Emmanuelle, is your ability to totally know yourself and to know that you are forever changing and evolving and making decisions based on that moment. I have often seen as a behavioral scientist, folks that get an identity. This is who I am. And yes, and they're not able to change based on the circumstances and make wise decisions. So they hold on to, I'm a VP of something or another, and they stay in jobs because of an identity, rather than go into a place where maybe they're better use, and vice versa, knowing when to leave entrepreneurship and go back in. So you've been able to understand yourself, understand where you are, not get hung up on, gee, I was a business owner, I'm always got to be but that I'm at a different place in my life. And in the place I'm at right now, I get to use all that I learned to help others make smart decisions.
Yeah.
And
It's
we call that accurate self-assessment, right?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I've never paid too much attention to the titles, right? My title was different things, but I always reminded people I'm also the cleaning lady in each of my businesses, right? I'm from the cleaning lady to the CEO. It doesn't matter what it's what I accomplish that matters, right? Not what my business card says.
Right.
But it's interesting because I do have candidates sometimes, and usually it comes more for the spouse from the spouses when
Yes.
the guy has an executive title like CEO or president or senior vice president of something really big, and now he's looking at a trades business, and they're like, my husband is a graduate of Harvard, he's not going to be, and so it is a process, and I think that's my nature, but I care more about what I do than what my business card says.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it can be a process for people, and we help them work through that too.
Yeah, identity, right? How we hold on to it or let it evolve based on what's going on, so we can become more, not just that title, not just that business, but we're really a whole lot more. All right, we got to get out of here, girls, or we could talk forever. Tracy, do you have any final thoughts?
Just super quick to dovetail off of what you said earlier, Rebecca, where you were mentioning how Emmanuelle will always find home. It's like you're a human compass, right? You're like a hummingbird. You're always going to find home. And to your point, Rebecca, whether that means in the US or France, or again in the US, or in this corporation, or in your own business, the whole point is that, yes, you live true to your values, and your values, one of your number one values is family. And it looks like that's, where you follow your heart. It's wherever that family is, and that you support others to do the same for their families. It's a beautiful thing. And I'm just so glad that we met and had the opportunity to speak with you.
Me too. Me too. Thank you again for carving out time. We know you have another meeting to go to. So those of you that are listening in, we want to thank you for listening in to the Franchise Woman podcast, where passion and purpose collide, profits are made, and relationships forged. We'll see you next week on another episode.
Thank you so much.